The wedding guests whispered behind gloved hands as Rowan Vale stood rigid at the altar, staring at nothing. He hadn't looked at her yet. The woman sold to him like livestock to clear his father's gambling debts. 23 years old and already trapped. His jaw clenched as the officiant droned on. Marriage as business transaction. Love was a luxury for men who hadn't watched everything crumble. When footsteps finally approached from behind, he kept his eyes forward. He'd agreed to this arrangement. He'd signed the papers. But he'd be damned if he'd pretend it was anything more than survival. Before we go further, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And hit that like button because this gets darker before it gets better. The morning of his wedding, Rowan Vale woke to find his bedroom ceiling crawling with water stains. Another leak. Another thing broken in the crumbling Vale estate that he couldn't afford to fix. He stared at the spreading brown marks, counting them like tallies of failure. 12 visible. Probably twice that many hidden behind the plaster. His father had been dead 8 months, and the rot he'd left behind kept spreading. Rowan dragged himself out of bed. The floorboards creaked under his weight. Another repair he couldn't make. Everything in this house screamed poverty now, no matter how carefully he tried to maintain appearances. The heavy curtains were faded, the carpets were worn bare in the centers. Even his wedding suit, hanging on the wardrobe door, was his father's old formal wear, taken in by a seamstress who'd accepted vegetables from the kitchen garden as payment because Rowan didn't have coin. He'd been 22 when his father died, 22 when he discovered the true depth of Theodore Vale's legacy. Debt stretching across 3 counties, unpaid loans to merchants who'd once called themselves friends, gambling markers held by men who very much were not friends. The Vale name, once respected in Ashford's rigid frontier society, had become synonymous with broken promises and bad credit. "You'll marry the Voss girl," his uncle had told him 3 months ago. "It's already arranged." Rowan had been in the study, going through another stack of demands for payment. He'd looked up slowly. "I'll what?" "Marcus Voss has a daughter. Second marriage, apparently. The mother died years back, and the girl's been difficult to place." His uncle had the decency to look uncomfortable. "She's 21, unmarried. There are circumstances." "What circumstances?" "That's not our concern. What matters is that Voss is willing to settle your father's debts in exchange for the match. All of them, Rowan. Every last marker." The papers had rustled in Rowan's hands. He'd read the same creditor's letter 3 times without absorbing a word. In exchange for marrying his daughter, it's a fair trade. It's selling myself. It's survival. His uncle's voice had gone hard. "You're drowning, boy. This is the only rope being thrown." Rowan had wanted to argue, wanted to find another way. But that night, he'd counted the money left in the household accounts, barely enough for 2 more months of basics. The winter had been hard. They'd let 3 servants go already. Mrs. Henning, who'd worked for the Vales for 30 years, had cried when he told her they couldn't afford her wages anymore. He'd signed the marriage contract the next morning. Now, 12 weeks later, he stood in front of a mirror that had belonged to his mother, adjusting a cravat that had belonged to his father, preparing to bind himself to a woman whose name he barely knew. Elara Voss. 21. Daughter of Marcus Voss, who'd made his fortune in textile manufacturing and property acquisition. That was all the information Rowan had bothered to gather. He hadn't asked what circumstances made her difficult to place, hadn't inquired about her education or interests or temperament. What did it matter? This wasn't a real marriage. It was a contract, a transaction, an exchange of goods, his name and bloodline for her father's money. He told himself that a dozen times. Would tell himself a dozen more before the day ended. The wedding was set for 2 o'clock at the Ashford Community Hall, a limestone building that served for civic gatherings and ceremonies. Not a church wedding. Rowan had insisted on that. If he was going to commodify something this fundamental, he wouldn't dress it up with religious ceremony. Let it be what it was. A legal arrangement witnessed by town officials and whatever society members felt obliged to attend. He arrived early. The hall was already half full. Curious townspeople who wanted to witness Rowan Vale's fall from grace, thinly disguised as well-wishers. He recognized most of them. Mrs. Talbot, who turned away his mother when she'd tried to get credit at the general store. James Brennan, who'd called in his father's loans the day after the funeral. The Henderson family, whose daughter Rowan had once courted before the debts became public knowledge. Catherine Henderson sat 3 rows back, beautiful as ever, her hand resting on her new husband's arm. She met Rowan's eyes for just a moment. There might have been pity there, or relief that she'd escaped being tied to his sinking ship. Rowan looked away first. His uncle appeared at his elbow. "Stand straight. Head up. You're still a Vale." "Am I?" The bitterness leaked through before he could stop it. "You're about to be a solvent 1. That counts for something." The officiant arrived, a thin, officious man named Caldwell, who served as town clerk and notary. He looked over his papers with the enthusiasm of someone processing a property transfer, which, Rowan supposed, wasn't far from the truth. "The bride's party should arrive shortly," Caldwell announced. "Take your position, Mr. Vale." Rowan moved to the front of the hall, stood where he was told, fixed his eyes on the far wall, and tried to feel nothing. The murmuring in the room changed pitch. He heard the heavy doors open, heard footsteps, heard his uncle's sharp intake of breath. "Don't look yet," his uncle hissed. "Wait for the processional." But Rowan hadn't planned to look anyway. What was the point? Whether she was plain or pretty, tall or short, fair or dark, none of it changed what this was. He'd learned that lesson already. Catherine Henderson had been beautiful, and she'd still chosen security over him the moment his prospects darkened. Beauty was just another commodity in their world. It didn't make contracts any more bearable. The officiant cleared his throat. "We gather today to witness the union of Rowan Theodore Vale and Alara Catherine Voss." The words washed over him. Standard ceremony, standard vows. Nothing standard about the circumstances, but nobody would acknowledge that. This would be performed with all the proper dignity and formality, as if it were a love match instead of a rescue package. "Do you, Rowan Vale, take this woman?" "I do." His voice came out flat, mechanical. The officiant paused, thrown by the lack of inflection, then continued. "Do you, Alara Voss, take this man?" "I do." Her voice was quiet but steady, lower than he'd expected. There was no tremor in it, no hesitation, just calm acceptance of a fate she apparently found no more appealing than he did. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Ashford, I pronounce you legally wed. You may—" "I'd like to leave now," Rowan spoke before the officiant finished. "If we're done." Stunned silence filled the hall. His uncle grabbed his arm. "Rowan, there's a reception." "I didn't agree to a reception. The contract specified the marriage ceremony. That's been completed." He finally turned to look at the woman beside him. The first thing he noticed was the scar. It ran from her left temple down across her cheek, pale and raised against her olive skin. Not a clean surgical scar, but something jagged and violent. A burn, maybe, or some kind of accident. It pulled slightly at the corner of her eye, giving her an asymmetrical appearance that society would call disfiguring. So that was the circumstance. The flaw that made her unmarketable. The reason Marcus Voss had to buy her a husband instead of attracting one naturally. Rowan felt something twist in his chest. Not pity, exactly. More like recognition. They were both damaged goods in their own ways. Both being traded because they couldn't command better prices. He met her eyes for the first time. They were dark brown, almost black, and they held no emotion he could read. No hope. No disappointment. Just the same flat acceptance he'd heard in her voice. "Mrs. Vale," he said, because apparently that was her name now. "I'll have someone collect your things and bring them to the house. You can take the west wing. I'll stay in the east. We don't need to pretend this is anything it isn't." Her expression didn't change. "Agreed." "Good." He looked at the assembled crowd. "Thank you all for attending. The ceremony is concluded." He walked out without waiting for a response. The Vale House sat on the edge of Ashford, far enough from town center to have once been prestigious, close enough to have become awkward as the town expanded. It was a 2-story timber and stone structure that had been elegant in his grandfather's day. Now it looked tired. The paint was peeling. The gardens were overgrown. The circular drive was pitted with potholes. Rowan stood in the front hall and wondered what Alara Voss, Alara Vale, would think when she saw it. Probably that she'd made a terrible bargain. Her father's money would be absorbed by this dying estate like water into sand. She'd be trapped here with a husband who could barely afford to feed her, in a house that was slowly collapsing. Well, that was her problem now. She'd signed the same contract he had, Mrs. Reeves, the housekeeper who'd stayed on despite irregular wages, appeared from the kitchen. "Sir? The new Mrs. Vale, should I prepare the master bedroom?" "The West Wing guest room. And make sure she understands she has her own space. I don't want any confusion about the nature of this arrangement." Mrs. Reeves's lips pressed into a thin line. She'd been his mother's housekeeper, had known him since he was born, and clearly had opinions about how he was handling his marriage. But she was too professional to voice them. "Yes, sir. Will there be a wedding supper?" "No, I'll eat in my study. She can eat wherever she prefers." He retreated to the study before Mrs. Reeves could respond. It was the only room in the house he'd managed to keep in decent repair, mainly because it was small and he could close the door on everything else. The books were still intact. The desk was solid. The chair was comfortable. He sat down and pulled out the contract he'd signed with Marcus Voss, read through it again, looking for any clause that might require him to actually interact with his new wife beyond legal necessity. There wasn't one. The arrangement was simple: marriage in exchange for debt relief. No stipulations about cohabitation. No requirements for heirs. Marcus Voss had wanted his daughter settled and had paid handsomely for the privilege of attaching her to a respectable name. What happened behind closed doors was apparently not his concern. Fine. They could live as strangers under the same roof. People did it all the time. Hell, half the society marriages in Ashford were functional separations with shared addresses. This would be the same, just more honest about it. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "What?" Mrs. Reeves opened the door. "Sir, Mrs. Vale has arrived. She's asking where to find you." "Tell her I'm occupied. You can show her the house." "She specifically asked for you, sir." Rowan slammed the contract on the desk harder than he meant to. "Fine. Send her in." Mrs. Reeves withdrew. A moment later, Alara appeared in the doorway. She'd changed out of the formal dress she'd worn for the ceremony. Now she wore a simple brown traveling outfit that looked well-made but practical. Her dark hair was pulled back severely. The scar was still visible, would always be visible, he supposed. She carried herself with straight-back posture that suggested either military training or finishing school. Probably the latter, given her class. "Mr. Vale?" She didn't wait for an invitation before stepping inside. "I wanted to clarify the terms of our arrangement." He leaned back in his chair. "I thought I'd been clear. Separate quarters, separate lives, legal marriage in name only. Publicly or privately?" The question caught him off guard. "What? Are we maintaining the appearance of a real marriage in public, or are we being honest about the nature of the contract?" He studied her face, looking for judgment or anger, found neither. She was asking a practical question about social navigation. He could respect that. "Publicly, we're married. I won't humiliate either of us by making this town more of a spectacle than it already is. Privately, we're strangers who happen to share an address." "And physically?" His jaw tightened. "What about it?" "The contract doesn't stipulate heirs. I'm clarifying that you have no expectations in that regard." Heat crawled up his neck. Not embarrassment, anger. "I don't have any expectations at all, Mrs. Vale. You're free to live your life however you see fit, as long as you maintain discretion. I'll do the same." Something flickered in her expression. Relief, maybe. "Good. Then we understand each other." Apparently. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Your housekeeper asked about meals. I assume we won't be dining together?" "Not unless socially necessary." "Fine, I'll take my meals in my room." She left without saying goodbye. Rowan sat in the silence she left behind, feeling like he'd just been evaluated and found wanting, which was absurd. He was the one who'd set the terms. He was the one maintaining boundaries. She'd just agreed to everything he proposed. So why did he feel like he'd lost something? Tap. The first week passed in careful avoidance. Rowan kept to his routine. Mornings in the fields that still produced enough crops to sell at market. Afternoons managing what remained of the estate's business interests. Evenings in his study going through accounts. He saw Alara at breakfast once. She'd come down early, apparently not yet familiar with his schedule. They'd nodded at each other like strangers in a boarding house and eaten in silence. She spent most of her time in the West Wing or walking the property. Mrs. Reeves reported that she'd asked for seeds and gardening tools. Apparently she planned to restore the flower gardens his mother had once maintained. "She has a good eye," Mrs. Reeves said, unprompted while serving Rowan's dinner. Asked intelligent questions about soil composition and sun exposure. Your mother would have liked her. Rowan didn't respond. His mother had been dead for 5 years. What she would have liked was irrelevant. But that night, unable to sleep, he stood at his bedroom window and looked down at the gardens. Even in darkness, he could see the work Alara had started. She'd cleared the worst of the weeds from the front beds, laid out new borders with stones. It was ambitious work for someone doing it alone. He watched for longer than he meant to before going back to bed. The second week brought practical complications. The Hendersons were hosting a dinner party, one of the social events that couldn't be declined without causing offense. The invitation specified Mr. and Mrs. Vale. Rowan considered sending his regrets anyway. Then he imagined the gossip that would follow, the whispers about his marriage already being troubled, the speculation about what was wrong with the Voss girl, that even a desperate man couldn't stand her company. He found Alara in the library reading. She looked up when he entered, marked her page carefully, waited. "There's a dinner party on Saturday," he said without preamble. "The Hendersons. We're expected to attend together." "I see." "It'll be 4 hours, maybe 5. We arrive together, maintain conversation during dinner, leave together. That's all that's required." "What's the dress code?" "Formal. Your father provided a wardrobe allowance as part of the settlement. There should be suitable options." She studied him for a long moment. "You're uncomfortable." "I'm practical. This is what we agreed to, public appearances when necessary." "No, you're uncomfortable about being seen with me." Her voice was matter of fact. "Because of the scar." The directness of it stunned him into honesty. "No, I'm uncomfortable because Catherine Henderson will be there, and the last time I attended one of their parties, I was courting her. Now I'll be there with a wife I didn't choose because I couldn't afford to marry the woman I wanted." Silence. Then, "At least you're honest." "I try to be." She stood, closing the book. "Saturday, 4 o'clock?" 6. "I'll be ready." She left the library without another word. Rowan stood there feeling like an ass. He hadn't meant to mention Catherine, hadn't meant to make it sound like Alara was second choice, even though she objectively was. The whole conversation had gotten away from him. He was used to controlling things, managing expectations, maintaining order. But every interaction with Alara left him feeling off balance, like he was missing something obvious. Saturday arrived too quickly. Rowan dressed carefully in his best formal wear, not his father's hand-me-downs, but the suit he'd had made back when the Vale name still commanded credit. It was 3 years old, but still fit. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a young man trying desperately to appear older, more established, more secure than he actually was. 23 and already beaten down by life. That's what he saw. He went downstairs at exactly 6 o'clock. Alara was waiting in the front hall. Rowan stopped on the stairs. She wore a deep green dress that was elegant without being ostentatious. The cut was modern, the fabric expensive. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken an hour to create. She wore minimal jewelry, just simple gold earrings. And she'd done something with cosmetics that didn't hide the scar, but somehow made it less the first thing you noticed. Made it part of her face rather than a flaw on her face. She looked striking. Not beautiful in the conventional sense, but striking in a way that would make people remember her. "Will I do?" she asked. No emotion in the question. "Yes." His voice came out rougher than intended. "You look appropriate." Something that might have been amusement crossed her face. What a ringing endorsement. The carriage ride to the Henderson estate was silent. They sat across from each other, not touching, watching the countryside pass by the windows. Rowan tried to think of something to say. Came up with nothing. Every potential topic of conversation felt like stepping into a minefield. The Henderson house blazed with light when they arrived. Carriages lined the drive. They weren't early. Probably half the county was already inside. Rowan offered his arm. Alara took it. Her hand was warm through his sleeve, her grip firm. "Ready?" he asked. "As much as you are." They went in together. The entrance hall was packed with people Rowan had known his entire life. People who'd watched the Vale family rise and fall. People who'd positioned themselves safely away when the collapse came. Now they smiled and offered congratulations that didn't quite reach their eyes. "Rowan, and this must be Mrs. Vale." James Brennan, who'd called in his father's loans, pumped Rowan's hand with false enthusiasm. Congratulations on your marriage. I hear the Voss family is quite prosperous. Translation: I hear you sold yourself to clear your debts. Thank you, Rowan said tightly. May I introduce my wife, Elara? Elara smiled. It was a polite practice smile that gave away nothing. Mr. Brennan? A pleasure. Brennan's eyes flicked to her scar, flicked away. Back to Rowan. Well, I hope you'll both be very happy. They moved deeper into the party. More introductions, more false pleasantries, more eyes sliding to Elara's scar and quickly away. Rowan felt his shoulders tensing with each interaction. This was worse than he'd anticipated. At least when people had pitied him, they'd been subtle about it. The stares at Elara were barely concealed. Mr. and Mrs. Vale! Catherine Henderson appeared, radiant in blue silk, her husband trailing behind. How wonderful to see you both! Rowan's chest tightened. Catherine, thank you for the invitation. Of course, she turned to Elara with what looked like genuine warmth. And you must be Elara. I've been dying to meet you. Tell me, are you settling in well? That old house must need so much work. It was perfectly calibrated to sound friendly while reminding everyone present that Rowan couldn't afford to maintain his family home. Elara's expression didn't change. The house has good bones. It just needs attention, rather like most things worth preserving. Catherine's smile faltered slightly. How pragmatic of you. I find pragmatism serves better than nostalgia. Elara's tone was pleasant. The words were not. Don't you? The air between them suddenly felt charged. Rowan had the distinct impression he was watching something he didn't fully understand. Catherine recovered quickly. Of course. Well, do enjoy the party. Dinner will be served shortly. She swept away, her husband following. Rowan looked at Elara. What was that? Nothing. She was being condescending. I returned the favor. She was being friendly. No. She was establishing hierarchy. There's a difference. Elara's eyes followed Catherine across the room. She's the woman you wanted to marry. It wasn't a question. How did you... The way you looked at her, the way she looked at you. It's obvious. Elara turned back to him. Does it bother you, being here with me instead of her? He should have lied. Should have said something diplomatic. Instead, he told the truth. Yes? She nodded slowly. At least you're consistent. What's that supposed to mean? You're honest about being bitter. I respect that more than false cheer. Dinner was announced before he could respond. The meal was elaborate. 6 courses, each more excessive than the last. Rowan was seated between Elara and Mrs. Talbot, who spent the entire first course telling him about her son's successful business ventures in the capital city. Subtle reminders that some people were thriving while the Vales struggled. Across the table, Catherine held court, laughing and charming everyone around her. Her husband watched her with obvious adoration. They looked happy. Genuinely happy. Rowan felt something ugly curl in his stomach. Not exactly jealousy, more like mourning for a future that would never exist. You're staring. Elara's voice was quiet enough that only he heard. He looked down at his plate. Sorry. Don't apologize. Just stop. The rest of the dinner passed in uncomfortable awareness. Rowan was hyperconscious of Elara beside him, the way she handled the formal place settings with practiced ease, the way she deflected invasive questions with polite vagueness, the way she didn't flinch when people stared at her scar. She was better at this than he was, better at navigating the social currents, at maintaining composure, at playing the role expected of her. It made him feel even more inadequate. When the party finally ended, they rode home in the same silence they'd arrived in, but this time it felt heavier, weighted with things unsaid. The carriage stopped in front of the Vale house. Rowan helped Elara down, then dismissed the driver. They stood in the front drive, night air cool around them. Thank you, Rowan said finally. For tonight, you handled it well. I've had practice at being stared at. Her voice was flat. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. She started toward the house, then stopped, turned back. Can I ask you something? Yes. If you could go back, if you could choose differently, would you still marry me? Or would you let the debt stand and keep pursuing her? The question hit like a punch, because the answer was obvious. If he could rewrite the past 6 months, he'd find another way. Any other way. He'd sell everything, work any job, accept any humiliation, anything except binding himself to someone he didn't love. His silence was answer enough. Alara nodded. That's what I thought. She walked inside without saying goodnight. Rowan stood alone in the darkness, listening to the sound of her footsteps fade, feeling like he'd failed some test he hadn't known he was taking. The third week, everything changed. It started with sound. Rowan was in his study late one evening, going through harvest projections that looked worse than he'd hoped. The numbers weren't adding up. Even with the debt relief from Marcus Voss, the estate's operating costs exceeded its income. He needed to find additional revenue or start making cuts. Again. He was so focused on the accounts that he almost didn't hear it. Music, faint, coming from somewhere in the house. He looked up, confused. Mrs. Reeves didn't play any instruments. The house didn't have a music room. His mother's piano had been sold years ago to cover gambling debts. The sound came again. Not a piano. Something stringed. A violin, maybe. Rowan stood, following the sound through the dark house. It led him to the west wing, to the room next to Alara's bedroom that had been used for storage. The door was slightly ajar. Light spilled through the gap. He pushed it open carefully. The storage furniture had been moved aside. In the cleared space, Alara stood with a violin tucked under her chin, playing. But it wasn't the refined, controlled music of parlor performances. This was raw, urgent. The melody twisted and fell and climbed again like something alive. It sounded angry, mournful, defiant. It sounded like she was bleeding the instrument. Rowan stood frozen in the doorway, unable to look away. She played with her eyes closed, body swaying slightly with the music. The scar on her face caught the lamplight, making it stand out more than usual. She looked utterly unself-conscious, completely absorbed in what she was creating. He didn't know how long he stood there. Time felt suspended. The music wrapped around him, pulling at something he'd locked away months ago. Years ago, maybe. When was the last time he'd felt anything that intensely? The piece ended abruptly. Alara lowered the violin, opened her eyes, and found him watching. She didn't startle, just looked at him with that same unreadable expression. I didn't mean to disturb you, Rowan said. His voice came out strange. You weren't disturbing me. I was disturbing you. No, that was... He struggled for words that wouldn't sound trite. That was extraordinary. It was adequate. It was more than adequate. Where did you learn to play like that? She set the violin down carefully in its case. My mother was a musician. Before she married my father, she taught me. I didn't know that. You didn't ask. No accusation in her tone, just fact. He stepped further into the room. What was that piece? I didn't recognize it. I wrote it. You compose? When I need to. She closed the violin case with precise movements. It helps. Helps with what? She looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, not opening exactly, more like a door being tested to see if it would hold weight. When I was 17, she said slowly, there was a fire at my father's factory. I was visiting that day. An accelerant spill. The whole building went up. Her hand moved unconsciously to her scar. They pulled me out. 12 other people didn't make it. For months afterward, I couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe without smelling smoke, couldn't close my eyes without seeing... She stopped. The music was the only thing that helped. When I played, I could make sense of it, give it shape. Rowan felt something crack in his chest. I'm sorry, I didn't know. No one does. My father doesn't talk about it. Easier to just say I had an accident and move on. She picked up the violin case. The scar bothers people. They don't want to hear the story that goes with it. It doesn't bother me. Yes, it does. You just hide it better than most. The accuracy of it stung. That's not fair, isn't it? She moved toward the door. You don't look at me, Rowan. You look past me or around me. You're polite and you're civil and you maintain every boundary we agreed to. But you don't actually see me. That's... He stopped. Because she was right. He'd been treating her like a contract provision, a living, breathing clause in an agreement he'd signed. I'm going to bed, Alara said quietly. Please close the door when you leave. She walked past him and disappeared down the hall. Rowan stood in the empty room, surrounded by displaced furniture and the lingering ghost of her music. He'd spent 3 weeks convinced he was handling this marriage in the most rational way possible, maintaining distance, protecting himself from further disappointment. But standing there, he realized that distance was just another kind of cowardice. He'd been so focused on what he'd lost, Catherine, his prospects, his pride, that he hadn't bothered to look at what he'd gained, or rather, who he'd gained. A woman who composed music that could tear your heart open. A woman who'd survived trauma and rebuilt herself. A woman who asked for nothing but honesty, and he'd given her nothing in return. Rowan walked back to his study in a daze, sat at his desk, stared at the harvest projections without seeing them. Somewhere in the house, Alara was probably preparing for bed, following her routine, living her separate life in their shared space. What would happen if he tried? If he actually made an effort to know her? The thought was terrifying, because trying meant risking failure, meant opening himself to more disappointment when it inevitably fell apart. But hadn't he already failed? Wasn't he already disappointed? At least if he tried, it would be an active choice rather than passive surrender. Rowan sat in his study until the early hours of morning, listening to the house settle around him, thinking about music and scars and the difference between survival and living. When dawn finally broke, he'd made a decision. He didn't know if it was the right one, didn't know if it would work. But for the first time in months, he felt something other than resignation. He felt possibility. The next morning, Rowan woke before dawn and did something he hadn't done in years. He went to the kitchen and made breakfast himself. Mrs. Reeves found him there, cracking eggs into a pan with more enthusiasm than skill. She stopped in the doorway, eyes wide. "Sir, what are you doing?" "Making breakfast." He gestured at the chaos spreading across the counter. "Or attempting to." "For yourself?" "For two." He flipped an egg. It broke. He swore under his breath. "Is Mrs. Vale awake yet?" Mrs. Reeves's expression shifted from shock to something that looked suspiciously like hope. "She usually rises early, takes her tea in the garden." "Right. Good." Another egg. Another broken yolk. "How do you make these things stay intact?" "Lower heat, sir, and perhaps a bit less force." 20 minutes later, Rowan carried a tray toward the garden. The eggs were salvageable, if not pretty. The toast was only slightly burned. The tea was probably cold by now. The whole thing looked like what it was, an amateur's desperate attempt. He found Alara exactly where Mrs. Reeves said she'd be, sitting on a stone bench near the flower beds she'd been restoring. She wore a simple gray dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger like this, less guarded. She noticed him approaching and her posture straightened, defensive. "I made breakfast," Rowan said, setting the tray down on the bench between them. "Well, I destroyed breakfast, and this is what survived." Alara looked at the tray, at him, back at the tray. "Why?" "Because I owe you an apology. Several, actually, and I'm not good with words, so I thought food might help." He sat down, careful to leave space between them. "The eggs are terrible. Fair warning." She picked up a fork, tested one of the eggs. "They're edible." "That's generous." "I'm feeling generous this morning." She took another bite. "What are you apologizing for?" "For treating you like a contract clause instead of a person. For making you feel invisible in your own home. For being so wrapped up in what I lost that I couldn't see what was in front of me." The words came out rushed, clumsy, but honest. Alara set down her fork. "What changed?" "Your music. Last night. I stood there listening and I realized..." He stopped, started again. "I've been surviving, just getting through each day. But you're not just surviving, you're creating something. You're making this place better even though you didn't have to, and I've been too self-absorbed to notice." "So you made eggs." "I made terrible eggs. It's a start." Something that might have been a smile touched her lips. "It's not a very good start." "I know. But I'm asking for a chance to do better." He turned to face her fully. "I can't promise this will turn into a real marriage. I can't promise I'll suddenly become someone worth knowing, but I can promise I'll try. I'll actually see you, talk to you, stop treating this like a prison sentence we're both serving." Alara was quiet for a long moment. Her fingers traced the rim of her teacup. 3 years ago, she said finally. Before the fire, I was engaged to a man my father approved of, someone from a good family with good prospects. We'd known each other since we were children. Rowan hadn't expected that. What happened? The fire happened. I spent 4 months recovering. When I finally came home, he took one look at me and ended things. Very politely, very properly. He said he couldn't marry someone who'd been marked like that. His exact words. Her voice stayed level, but Rowan saw her hand tighten on the cup. My father was furious. Not at him, at me. He said I should have been more careful, should have stayed home that day, should have somehow prevented my own disfigurement because now I was damaged goods. She looked at Rowan. So when he arranged this marriage, I knew exactly what it was. You needed money. He needed to offload a daughter nobody else wanted, a fair transaction. Ilara, let me finish. Her voice sharpened. I didn't expect love, didn't even expect friendship. I expected exactly what you gave me, distance and basic civility. And I was fine with that because at least you were honest about it. You didn't pretend. You didn't make promises you wouldn't keep. She stood, setting the teacup down with deliberate care. So here's what I need to know, Rowan. Are you doing this because you actually want to try? Or because you feel guilty about how you've treated me and this is your way of making yourself feel better? The question landed like a challenge because she was right to ask it. He'd spent 3 weeks maintaining careful distance, and now suddenly he wanted to change the terms? Why should she believe him? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe it started as guilt. But standing there last night, listening to you play, something shifted. I realized I've been punishing us both for circumstances neither of us chose. And I'm tired of being angry all the time. Tired of living like everything's already over. So this is about you feeling better? No. Yes, partially. He stood too, frustrated with his inability to articulate what he meant. I'm doing this badly. I'm trying to say that I want to stop treating you like an obligation. I want to actually know who you are. And maybe if I do that, I'll stop feeling like I'm drowning. Ilara studied his face for a long time. Whatever she was looking for, he hoped she found it. One meal, she said finally. Dinner, tonight. You tell me something real about yourself, not surface details. Something that costs you to share. And I'll do the same. Then we'll see if there's anything worth building here. Deal. She picked up the breakfast tray. And Rowan, next time you make eggs, use butter. Lots of butter. She walked back toward the house, leaving him standing in the garden with something that felt dangerously close to hope. That evening, Rowan set the dining room table himself. Nothing fancy. They didn't have the resources for elaborate meals. But Mrs. Reeves had made a decent roast chicken, and he'd found candles that weren't too badly melted. Ilara arrived exactly at 7, wearing the same green dress from the Henderson party. She'd left her hair down. It softened her features, made the scar less prominent somehow. They sat across from each other. Mrs. Reeves served the meal and withdrew, leaving them in candlelit quiet. You first, Ilara said, cutting into her chicken. Something real. Rowan had been thinking about this all day. What to share? What would be enough to prove he was serious without completely exposing himself? My father was a drunk and a gambler, he said bluntly. Everyone knows that part. What they don't know is that I knew about the debts for almost a year before he died. He told me, showed me the ledgers, cried about it, promised he'd fix it. His hands tightened on his fork. I believed him, every time. He'd swear he was done gambling, done drinking, and I'd think maybe this time it would stick. But it never did. The night before he died, he came to my room at 2 a.m. He was drunk. He said, I'm sorry, boy. I ruined everything. And I told him to sleep it off, that we'd talk in the morning. But he died that night, Ilara said quietly. Heart gave out. The doctor said it was probably coming for years. All that drinking. Rowan looked down at his plate. And I stood at his funeral thinking about how my last words to him were dismissive, how I'd stopped believing he could change. Maybe if I'd pushed harder, gotten him help, forced him to face the consequences sooner, you'd have ended up in the same place, just with more scars. He looked up sharply. Ilara met his gaze steadily. You can't save people who don't want to be saved, Rowan. Trust me, I tried with my mother. Your mother? My turn. She set down her fork. My mother was a brilliant musician, truly exceptional. She could have had a career, but she married my father instead because that's what her family wanted. Security over passion. She spent 20 years being quietly miserable in a marriage that slowly crushed her. Alara's voice stayed controlled, but something raw bled through. When I was 14, I found her in her music room. She'd been drinking. Not like your father, she wasn't an alcoholic. But that day she was drunk enough to tell me the truth. That she regretted everything. That marrying my father was the worst decision she ever made. That having me was... She stopped. That having a child trapped her even more completely. Rowan felt his chest tighten. Alara, she died 6 months later. Pneumonia, officially. But she stopped fighting it, just gave up. And I spent years wondering if I was the reason. If she'd have found a way to leave if she hadn't had a daughter to consider. That's not your fault, isn't it? Her eyes were bright, but no tears fell. She was trapped. I watched her die slowly from being trapped. And then my father arranged my marriage to someone I barely knew, and I realized I was repeating her exact pattern, giving up my life because it was expected. But you're not like her, Rowan said. You're here. You're building gardens. You're composing music. You're not giving up. No, I'm not. She picked up her wine glass. Because I decided that if I'm going to be trapped in a marriage I didn't choose, I'm at least going to make it mean something. Even if we never love each other, even if this stays a transaction forever, I'm going to create something valuable with my life. They sat in silence for a moment. The candles flickered. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. I don't want you to feel trapped, Rowan said finally. That's the last thing I want. Then what do you want? The question hung between them. What did he want? 3 weeks ago, the answer would have been simple. Survival, money, stability. Maybe Catherine Henderson. Now? I want to stop feeling like I'm already dead, he said. I want to find a reason to care about tomorrow. And I think, maybe, that starts with actually trying, with you. Alara considered this. That's not nothing. It's not everything either. No, but it's honest. She raised her glass slightly. To honest failures instead of dishonest successes. He touched his glass to hers. I can drink to that. They finished dinner with easier conversation. Small things at first, Alara's plans for the gardens, Rowan's ideas for making the estate profitable again. But gradually deeper topics emerged. Books they'd read, places they'd dreamed of traveling. The difference between loneliness and solitude. By the time Mrs. Reeves cleared the plates, something had shifted between them. Not intimacy, exactly. More like the possibility of intimacy. A door opening just slightly. Thank you, Alara said as she stood to leave. For dinner, for trying. Same time tomorrow? She paused at the doorway. Same time tomorrow. After she left, Rowan sat alone at the table, feeling lighter than he had in months. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. But it was the absence of constant weight. That counted for something. The next 3 weeks became a careful dance of incremental closeness. They ate dinner together every night, started taking morning walks through the property. Alara showed Rowan her progress on the gardens. He showed her the estate's account books, explained the financial challenges they faced. You need additional income streams, she said one evening, studying the numbers. The land alone won't sustain the house. I know, I just don't know what else to do. My father's textile factories need reliable crop suppliers. If you converted the eastern fields to flax cultivation, you could establish a direct contract. Rowan looked at the map she'd sketched. That's actually viable. I did grow up around manufacturing. I know more about supply chains than most people find socially acceptable. A slight smile. One of the reasons I was difficult to place. Well, I find it extremely acceptable. They implemented her plan over the following weeks. Rowan negotiated contracts while Alara handled the logistics. They worked well together, her analytical mind complementing his practical knowledge of the land. The estate began showing signs of recovery. But it wasn't just business. Small moments of genuine connection accumulated like interest. One afternoon, Rowan found Alara in the library, struggling with a stuck window. Without thinking, he moved behind her, reaching up to help. For a moment, they were pressed close together, his arms bracketing hers as they both pushed at the frame. The window gave suddenly. Cool air rushed in. Neither of them moved. Rowan was acutely aware of how close she was. The scent of lavender soap, the warmth of her back against his chest, the way his heart had started beating faster. Alara turned her head slightly. Their faces were inches apart. Rowan! A door slammed somewhere in the house. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Mrs. Reeves appeared in the doorway. "Sir, there's a gentleman here to see you, Mr. Voss." The warmth drained from Rowan's body. "Marcus Voss? Alara's father?" "Yes, sir. He's waiting in the front parlor." Rowan looked at Alara. Her expression had gone completely blank. "Did you know he was coming?" he asked. "No." Her voice was flat. "He doesn't visit." They went to the parlor together. Marcus Voss stood by the fireplace, examining the room with obvious distaste. He was a large man, well-dressed, with iron gray hair and calculating eyes. The kind of man who assessed everything in terms of value and found most things wanting. Alara. He didn't embrace her, didn't smile, just nodded like she was a business associate. "You're looking well." "Father," her tone matched his, "this is unexpected. I was in the area on business, thought I'd see how you've settled." His eyes shifted to Rowan. "Mr. Vale, your estate looks rustic." Translation, shabby, poor, beneath him. "We're making improvements," Rowan said carefully. "The flax contract has been profitable." "Ah, yes, I heard about that." Voss moved toward the window. "Clever arrangement. I assume that was your doing, Alara." "We worked on it together." "Of course." He turned back to them. "I actually came to discuss a business matter. I'm considering expanding my operations into Ashford, constructing a new factory here. I'll need land. Thought perhaps we could come to an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Rowan asked. "The southern portion of your property would be ideal. Good access to the river, close to town. I'm prepared to offer a generous lease." Rowan's mind raced. The southern fields were some of their best agricultural land, but a lease to Voss would mean guaranteed income, real financial security. "That land is currently under cultivation," Alara said. "Losing it would impact our crop production." "You'd be compensated well beyond any crop value," Voss said dismissively. "And frankly, my dear, your husband needs the money more than he needs those fields." The condescension in his voice made Rowan's jaw tighten. "I'd need to see the terms," he said. "Naturally, I'll have my lawyers draw up a proposal." Voss checked his pocket watch. "I should be going. Business dinner in town. Alara, walk me out." It wasn't a request. Alara's face remained expressionless. "Of course." She left with her father. Rowan stayed in the parlor, feeling like he'd just been evaluated and found barely adequate. 10 minutes later, Alara returned. Her careful composure had cracked. She looked pale, her hands trembling slightly. "What did he say?" Rowan asked. "The usual." Her voice was brittle. "That I should be making myself more useful, that he expects returns on his investment, that if this marriage doesn't produce results, meaning heirs or significant financial gains, he'll consider it a failed venture." "You're not an investment. To him I am. I always have been." She moved to the window, arms wrapped around herself. "He wanted to inspect me. Make sure you were actually treating me like a wife instead of just a business partner. He asked if I was pregnant yet." Rowan felt anger rise in his chest. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That we're still establishing our household." She laughed without humor. "He said I had 6 months to fulfill my obligations or he'd reassess the arrangement. He can't reassess anything. The debts are settled. The marriage is legal. He's Marcus Voss. He can do whatever he wants." She turned to face him. "Including making your life miserable if he thinks you're not holding up your end of the bargain." "I don't care what he thinks." "You should. He can destroy the flax contracts, blackball you with every supplier in the territory, make it impossible for you to do business anywhere he has influence, which is everywhere." Her voice rose. "You married me to solve your financial problems, Rowan. If my father decides you're not giving him what he wants, you'll be right back where you started. Worse, probably." The fear in her voice cut through his anger. This wasn't just about him. She was terrified of her father, of what he could do, of being caught between her husband and the man who'd controlled her entire life. Rowan crossed the room and took her hands. They were ice cold. "Listen to me. I don't give a damn what your father wants. You're not obligated to produce an heir on his timeline. You're not obligated to do anything you don't want to do. And if he tries to punish us for that, we'll deal with it together." "You don't understand. I understand that he treats you like property, like something he owns and can dispose of if it doesn't perform properly. And I'm telling you that I won't be part of that." He squeezed her hands gently. "You said you didn't want to be trapped like your mother. Well, I'm not going to trap you. Not for money, not for security, not for anything. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She pulled her hands free, wiping at her face angrily. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. No. Because eventually you'll have to choose. Your estate or me, your security or my freedom. And when that moment comes, you'll choose the same way everyone else has. You'll choose survival. You don't know that. Don't I? She stepped back. 3 weeks ago, you told me outright that you wished you'd married someone else. That you'd rather have Catherine Henderson than me. What's changed? Some dinners? Some conversations? That's not enough to override basic human nature. You're right, Rowan said. 3 weeks ago, I would have chosen differently. But you want to know what I learned since then? Catherine Henderson is exactly what I thought I wanted. Beautiful, socially acceptable, financially secure. And she would have made me absolutely miserable. Because she's not real. She's a performance. Everything about her is calculated to please other people. He moved closer, though he didn't touch her. But you? You're the most real person I've ever met. You say what you mean. You create beautiful things because you need to, not because anyone's watching. You've survived things that would have destroyed me. And yes, maybe I started trying because I felt guilty, but I'm here now because you're fascinating and infuriating and unlike anyone I've ever known. Alara stared at him. That's not love. No, it's not. He held her gaze. But it's the foundation for something that could be, if you're willing to risk it. The silence stretched between them. Rowan could hear his own heartbeat, could see the war happening behind Alara's eyes, between hope and self-protection, between the possibility of connection and the certainty of disappointment. I'm afraid, she whispered. I'm so tired of being afraid, but I don't know how to stop. Neither do I, so maybe we figure it out together. She closed the distance between them, rested her forehead against his chest. Rowan wrapped his arms around her carefully, like she might shatter. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the gathering darkness, while somewhere in Ashford her father plotted, and the estate slowly crumbled, and the future remained uncertain. But for that moment they had this. A week later, Marcus Voss's lawyers delivered the lease proposal. The terms were predatory. Low payments, excessive control over land use, clauses that would essentially give Voss ownership of their best fields without the responsibility. He's testing you, Alara said, reading through the contract. Seeing if you're desperate enough to sign anything. I'm not signing this. He'll retaliate. Let him. Rowan drafted a counteroffer with terms that were actually fair. Voss rejected it within a day. Then the threats started. First, 2 of their flax contracts mysteriously fell through. The suppliers cited restructuring, but Rowan knew Voss's fingerprints when he saw them. Then the bank that held their operating line of credit called it in. Full payment in 30 days. Then Marcus Voss himself appeared at their door. You're being unreasonable, he told Rowan, standing in the same parlor as before. I'm offering you a lifeline, and you're too proud to take it. I'm not too proud. Your terms are exploitative. They're business. If you had any sense, you'd recognize that. Voss's expression hardened. Let me be clear, Vale. I invested in this marriage expecting returns. If you can't provide them willingly, I'll extract them by force. Sign my lease, or I'll make sure every door in this territory closes in your face. No. The word came out harder than Rowan intended. But he was done being pushed around by men who thought money gave them the right to control other people's lives. Voss's eyes went cold. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. Not just yours. Voss looked past Rowan toward where Alara stood in the doorway. My daughter will pay the price for your stubbornness as well. I hope you've considered that. Leave her out of this. She's already in this. She has been since the day I bought you for her. He moved toward the door, pausing next to Alara. You could end this, you know. Talk sense into your husband. Or come home. I'll find you another arrangement. A better one. Alara's voice was steady. I'm already home. Something flickered in Voss's expression, surprise maybe, or anger. We'll see how long that sentiment lasts when the estate collapses around you. He left without another word. Rowan turned to Alara. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have provoked him. Yes, you should have. She moved to where he stood. He needed to hear that he doesn't control us. Both of us. He can still destroy us financially. So we rebuild, again, She took his hand. Isn't that what we've been doing this whole time anyway? Rowan pulled her close, kissing her forehead. When did you become fearless? About 30 seconds ago. I'm hoping the feeling lasts. It did last. Through the next week when 2 more contracts evaporated. Through the scramble to find alternative buyers for their crops. Through the moment when Rowan had to admit they might actually lose the estate despite everything. We could sell the southern fields, he said one night, going through their dwindling options. Not to your father, to someone else. That would give us enough to cover the debts and restructure. And lose your family land. It's just land, dirt and grass and memories of people who are gone. He looked at her across the table. You're here. That matters more. Alara's eyes widened. Then she stood, walked around the table, and kissed him. It wasn't tentative or careful. It was fierce and desperate and full of everything they'd been holding back. Rowan responded without thinking, pulling her closer, pouring months of frustration and fear and unexpected hope into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alara kept her hands on his face. Don't sell the land, she said. I have another idea. What? My mother left me money, in a trust that my father can't touch. It was supposed to be my inheritance, but I can access it early. We use that to cover the immediate debts. Then we take a gamble. What kind of gamble? Her eyes were bright, almost wild. We expand. Instead of shrinking to survive, we grow. We build our own processing facility for the flax, cut out the middlemen, create our own contracts directly with manufacturers in the capital. It's risky. It could fail spectacularly. But if it works, we'll be independent of my father's influence entirely. Rowan stared at her. That would take everything. Your inheritance, our savings, probably loans we can't afford. If it doesn't work, then we lose everything together. But at least we'll have tried. It was insane, reckless, the kind of desperate gamble his father would have made. But it was also brilliant, bold, the kind of move that could actually change their circumstances instead of just managing decline. Yes, Rowan said. Let's do it. Alara smiled, really smiled, not the careful expression she usually wore. You're sure? No, but I'm in anyway. She kissed him again. This time it was slower, deeper, full of promise. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. I should go, she said, before I do something we're not ready for. Are we? Not ready? She touched his face gently. Ask me again tomorrow, after we've made at least one decision with clear heads instead of desperation and adrenaline. Fair enough. She left, but this time she looked back from the doorway. The way she looked at him made his chest tight. The next morning, they went to the bank together and withdrew every penny of Alara's trust fund. Then they started planning the impossible. The construction site for the processing facility looked like a mud pit crossed with a battlefield. Rowan stood at the edge of it, watching workers struggle to lay foundation stones in ground that kept shifting with the spring rains. 3 weeks into the project, and they were already behind schedule. The east wall keeps sinking, the foreman said, wiping rain from his face. We need better drainage or we'll be rebuilding this section twice. How much will that cost? Another 200 at least. Maybe 3 if we hit bedrock. Rowan did the math in his head. They didn't have 300. They barely had 2. Do it, but find the cheapest solution that'll actually work. The foreman nodded and trudged back into the mud. Alara appeared at Rowan's elbow, her boots caked in wet clay. She'd spent the morning negotiating with suppliers who kept raising their prices the moment they heard the Vale name. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, and she had ink stains on her fingers from signing contracts all morning. The timber delivery is delayed another week, she said. Storm damage at the mill. They're prioritizing their existing contracts. Can we source it elsewhere? For twice the price, yes. Then we wait. He looked at the half-built structure struggling to emerge from the ground. We're running out of money faster than I calculated. I know. She didn't sound worried, which somehow made it worse. I sold my mother's jewelry this morning. That should cover us for another month. Rowan's stomach dropped. Alara? It was just sitting in a box. She's dead. I don't need trinkets to remember her. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but he heard the tightness beneath it. We needed the money more. I didn't want you to have to eat. I know what you wanted, but this is what we have. She touched his arm briefly. Come on. We have a meeting with the equipment broker in an hour. Try to look solvent. The equipment broker was a weasel-faced man named Griffith who operated out of a warehouse near the river district. He looked them over with obvious skepticism when they arrived. "Processing equipment for flax," Rowan said. "We need scutching machines, hacklers, and spinning frames, industrial grade." "That's expensive equipment for a new operation." Griffith lit a cigarette. "You have capital backing." "We have sufficient resources," Alara said smoothly. "The question is whether you have reliable equipment at reasonable prices." "I have equipment. Whether you can afford it is another matter." He gestured toward the warehouse floor. "I can show you what I've got, but I'll need to see proof of funds before we discuss terms." They spent an hour examining rusted machines and calculating what could be repaired versus what needed replacing. Griffith's prices were inflated, but not impossible. Still, by Rowan's count, they were short about $4,000 for everything they needed. "We'll take the scutching machines and 2 of the hacklers," Rowan said finally. "The spinning frames we'll source elsewhere. Those frames are the best you'll find in the territory. They're also overpriced by about 30%. Alara met Griffith's eyes without blinking. "We're not desperate enough to be stupid." Griffith's expression soured. "You're Theodore Vale's son, aren't you? I heard about him. Bad with money. Died owing half the territory." The casual cruelty of it hit Rowan like a fist. Before he could respond, Alara stepped forward. "Mr. Vale is nothing like his father," she said, her voice gone cold. "And you'll address him with respect, or we'll take our business to someone less interested in gossip. There's no one else selling equipment like this." "Then I suggest you stop insulting potential customers." She pulled out a bank draft. "We're prepared to pay 50% now, remainder on delivery. Take it or we walk." Griffith looked at the draft, at Alara's unflinching stare, finally shrugged. "Deal. But if the remainder doesn't come through, I'm repossessing everything, contract or no contract." They signed the paperwork in tense silence. Walking back to the carriage, Rowan felt something tight in his chest. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Do what?" "Defend me. Against what he said about my father." Alara stopped walking, turned to face him. "Yes, I did. Because what he said was cruel and wrong. Your father made mistakes. That doesn't define you." Her eyes searched his face. "Unless you let it." "I'm trying not to." "I know." She took his hand, right there in the street where anyone could see. "That's why this is going to work." But that night, lying in bed, his own bed still, Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that they were building a house of cards in a windstorm. Every expense revealed 2 more they hadn't anticipated. Every solution created new problems. They were hemorrhaging money with nothing to show for it yet, except mud and half-built walls. He got up, unable to sleep, and went to the study. Found Alara already there, surrounded by ledgers and calculations. "Can't sleep either?" she asked without looking up. "We're going to lose everything, aren't we?" She set down her pen. "Probably. The odds aren't good." "That's not reassuring." "You want reassurance? Wrong person." She leaned back in her chair. "I can give you honesty. We're underfunded, overextended, and competing against established operations with deeper pockets. We have maybe a 30% chance of success." 30%. That's generous. I'm feeling optimistic. She smiled tiredly. "But you know what? 30% is better than 0, which is what we'd have if we'd just given up." Rowan moved around the desk, pulled her to her feet, kissed her hard enough that she made a small sound of surprise. When they broke apart, her eyes were wide. "What was that for?" "Because you're possibly insane and definitely brilliant, and I'm—" He stopped. The words caught in his throat. "You're what?" He looked at her face, the scar that no longer seemed like a flaw, but just part of who she was, the intelligence in her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. Everything about her that had once seemed like settling and now seemed like the only thing worth fighting for. "I'm falling in love with you," he said. The silence stretched. Alara's expression went carefully blank. "Don't," she said finally. "Don't what?" "Don't say things like that because we're stressed and scared. Don't confuse desperation for love." She pulled away from him. "We're partners in this venture. That's enough." "Is it?" "It has to be." Her voice was sharp now. "Because if we start pretending this is a love story, we'll make stupid decisions based on emotion instead of logic, and we can't afford that. This isn't about logic. Everything is about logic. That's the only way we survive this." She was breathing hard now, almost panicking. You think you love me because I'm here, because I'm fighting beside you, because we're in this impossible situation together. But that's not love, Rowan. That's just proximity and adrenaline. You don't know what I feel. Neither do you. Not really. Not yet. She moved toward the door. We have enough to worry about without adding complicated emotions to the mix. Emotions are already complicated. Then let's not make them more so. She paused at the threshold. I need this to stay practical. I need to be able to walk away if it all collapses without feeling like I've lost anything except money. Can you understand that? No, he couldn't, because he'd already lost the ability to think of this as purely transactional. But he could see the fear in her eyes, the way she was protecting herself from another potential abandonment. Fine, he said. We keep it practical. She left without saying goodnight. Rowan stood alone in the study, feeling the weight of words unsaid pressing against his ribs. The next morning brought worse news. Marcus Voss had purchased the property adjacent to their construction site and was filing for an injunction to halt their building, claiming it would interfere with his planned development. It's harassment, Alara said, reading through the legal papers. Pure intimidation. He doesn't care about that land. He just wants to slow us down. Can he actually stop construction? Until we contest it in court, yes, and that'll take weeks. She threw the papers down. This is my fault. I should have anticipated he'd do something like this. How could you anticipate your father sabotaging his own daughter? Because that's what he does. Her voice rose. He punishes people who don't fall in line. I knew that. I've known that my entire life. And I still thought we could just build something without him crushing it. Rowan had never seen her this rattled. She was always controlled, always thinking 3 steps ahead. But now she looked like she was barely holding it together. We'll fight it, he said. With what? We can't afford lawyers. Every penny we have is tied up in equipment and materials. She laughed bitterly. He knows that. He's counting on it. Then we find another way. There is no other way. He wins. He always wins. She walked out before Rowan could respond. He found her an hour later in the half-built facility, sitting on a pile of lumber in the rain, not crying, just staring at nothing. Your foreman is looking for you, Rowan said, climbing up to sit beside her. Something about the drainage system. I told him to handle it. He says it needs your approval. Then he'll have to wait. She didn't look at him. I'm not going back there. Not today. They sat in silence. Rain drummed on the partial roof above them. Workers moved around below, oblivious to the impending legal disaster. My mother used to tell me stories, Alara said suddenly, when I was little, before she got sad, about musicians who played for kings and queens, who traveled the world and made beautiful things. Her voice was distant. She said if you were good enough, talented enough, you could escape anything. You could build a life that was yours. She was right. No, she wasn't. She was talented, genuinely brilliant, and she still got trapped, still died miserable and alone. Alara's hands clenched on her knees. I thought I could be different. Thought I could be smart enough, strong enough to avoid her fate. But here I am. Trapped in a marriage I didn't choose, fighting a battle I can't win, becoming exactly what she was. Rowan wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but he understood that despair, had felt it himself standing at his father's grave, realizing he'd inherited nothing but debt and failure. You know what the difference is? He said finally. What? You're not alone. Your mother was. She fought by herself and it broke her, but you have someone fighting with you. That doesn't change the outcome. Maybe not, but it changes what the fight means. He turned to face her. When I was drowning in my father's debts, I thought the only thing that mattered was survival, just making it through each day. But these last few months with you, even with everything falling apart, I felt more alive than I have in years. That's just the adrenaline talking. No, it's you. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. You make me want to build something instead of just survive. You make me believe it's possible. Even when it's not? Especially then. She looked at him finally. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. What if we lose everything? Then we lose it together, and we start over. You say that now, but when it actually happens, when the creditors come and the facility gets torn down and we're left with nothing, you'll resent me. You'll wish you'd never made this gamble. Will you? The question stopped her. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked away. I don't know, she whispered. I'm so scared, Rowan. I'm terrified that we're making the same mistakes our parents made, that we're going to end up just as broken. We might, but at least we'll know we tried. He squeezed her hand. And at least we'll have each other. That counts for something. Does it? Yes. It counts for everything. She leaned against him. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They sat there in the rain, watching their impossible dreams struggle to exist, knowing the odds were stacked impossibly against them. The injunction hearing was scheduled for the following week. Rowan spent 3 days trying to find a lawyer who'd take their case. Every attorney in Ashford either worked for Marcus Voss or was too smart to oppose him. Finally, a young lawyer fresh from the capital agreed to represent them. His name was Daniel Warren, and he couldn't have been more than 25. I'll be honest, Warren said, reviewing their case. Your father-in-law has significant resources and political influence. Our best argument is that his claim of interference is baseless since his development plans are vague and unsubstantiated. Will that work? Elara asked. Maybe, if the judge is impartial. Warren didn't sound confident. The hearing took place in a cramped courtroom that smelled like old wood and desperation. Marcus Voss arrived with 3 lawyers in expensive suits. They took up half the room. Voss didn't acknowledge Elara at all, just sat there radiating controlled anger. The judge was a thin man named Hartley, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He listened to both sides present their arguments with obvious boredom. Mr. Voss claims the construction creates noise pollution and potential environmental hazards, his lead attorney said. He's concerned about the impact on his planned residential development. What residential development? Warren countered. There are no filed plans, no permits requested. This is a transparent attempt to interfere with legitimate business competition. Mr. Voss doesn't need to justify his concerns to satisfy an injunction request. Back and forth they went, trading legal jargon while Rowan's future hung in the balance. He watched Elara's face growing paler as the hearing progressed, watched her father's satisfied smirk. Finally, Judge Hartley held up a hand. I've heard enough. The injunction is granted pending further environmental review. Rowan's stomach dropped. Your Honor, Warren started. The review will take 6 to 8 weeks. Construction must cease immediately. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Elara stood abruptly and walked out. Rowan followed, pushing through the crowd. He caught up with her in the hallway outside. She was standing very still, staring at nothing. Elara? 8 weeks. We don't have 8 weeks. The equipment payments are due in 4. The workers need to be paid weekly. The materials are on timed contracts. Her voice was mechanical. This isn't a delay, it's a death sentence. Marcus Voss emerged from the courtroom, his lawyers trailing behind. He saw them and changed direction. Elara. He stopped in front of them. This could have been avoided. You did this. Her voice shook. You deliberately destroyed what we were building. I protected my interests, as any businessman would. Voss's expression was cold. You chose poorly, daughter. Sided with pride over practicality. Now you're learning the cost of that mistake. The cost is my life, my marriage, everything I've tried to build. Then you should have built something more sustainable, something I could support. He glanced at Rowan with obvious disdain. Instead, you bet everything on a losing proposition. Rowan stepped forward. She bet on herself, on us. That's not losing, isn't it? Look around you, boy. You're drowning, and you're dragging her down with you. Voss turned back to Elara. Come home. I'll dissolve this marriage. Find you something better. You don't have to sink with this ship. No. Don't be stupid. I said no. Elara's voice went hard. I'm not coming home. I'm not leaving him. And I'm not giving up. Something shifted in Voss's expression. Real anger broke through the controlled facade. Then you're more of a fool than I thought. Enjoy your poverty. He walked away without looking back. Elara was shaking. Rowan put his arms around her and felt her collapse against him. What do we do? She whispered. How do we fix this? I don't know. That's not helpful. I'm trying to be honest. He held her tighter. We're out of options. Out of money. Out of time. She pulled back, looking up at him. Her eyes were fierce despite the tears. Then we find new options. New money, new time. How? I don't know yet, but we figure it out together. She grabbed his face with both hands. You told me you were falling in love with me. Last night, you said it. You told me not to. I know what I said. I was scared. I'm still scared. Her voice broke. But I think I'm falling too, and I can't lose this. I can't lose you. Not to my father, not to money, not to anything. Rowan kissed her, right there in the courthouse hallway where anyone could see. Kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. When they broke apart, people were staring. He didn't care. Come on, he said, taking her hand. We have work to do. They went back to the estate and spent the night going through every possible solution. Selling assets, taking loans, finding investors. Nothing added up to enough. At 3 a.m, sitting on the floor of the study surrounded by crumpled papers, Alara made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. This is insane. Probably. Rowan leaned against the desk. But I'd rather be insane with you than sane and alone. That's the most ridiculous thing you've ever said. I know. She crawled over to where he sat and kissed him, slowly this time, thoroughly, like they had all the time in the world instead of a ticking clock counting down to ruin. Take me to bed, she whispered against his mouth. Alara, not to seduce you, not to complicate things more, just to not be alone tonight. Her eyes were honest, vulnerable. Please. They went upstairs together, to his room, lay down on top of the covers, fully clothed, wrapped around each other. Tell me something good, Alara said into the darkness. Like what? Anything. Some future that doesn't involve bankruptcy and failure. Rowan thought for a moment. 5 years from now, we're sitting on the porch of this house. It's been repaired. The gardens are beautiful because you made them that way. The facility is operational and profitable, and we're watching our daughter play in the flower beds. Daughter? In this fantasy, yes. She has your eyes and my stubbornness. She's going to be hell to raise. Alara laughed softly. That's a nice fantasy. Maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe. She pressed closer. Ask me again. Ask you what? What you asked before, about being ready. His heart started pounding. Are we ready? No, but I don't care anymore. She lifted her head to look at him. I want this to be real. All of it. Not a contract, not a transaction, a real marriage. With you. Rowan pulled her on top of him, kissed her until they were both breathless. You're sure? I've never been less sure of anything, but I'm choosing it anyway. What happened next was fumbling and awkward and perfect. They were both nervous, both unsure, both trying too hard and then not trying at all. It wasn't the smooth, practiced intimacy of experienced lovers. It was messy and real and punctuated with nervous laughter and whispered reassurances. Afterward, lying tangled together, Alara traced patterns on his chest. That was terrible, Rowan finished. I was going to say hours. She smiled against his shoulder. We'll get better at it. We'd better, otherwise we're doomed. She laughed, really laughed. The sound filled something in him that had been empty. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, facing impossible odds, but facing them together. The next morning brought a visitor neither of them expected. Catherine Henderson arrived in a carriage, alone, asking to speak with Rowan privately. Alara answered the door. The two women looked at each other for a long moment. Mrs. Vale, Catherine said, is your husband available? What do you want with him? To help, if he'll let me. Alara called for Rowan. He came downstairs, surprised to see Catherine standing in their front hall. Mrs. Henderson, this is unexpected. I heard about the injunction, about what Marcus Voss is doing. Catherine looked uncomfortable. I have information that might help, but I need to speak with you privately. Alara started to leave. Rowan caught her hand. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of my wife. Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. Then she nodded. Very well. My husband's firm does legal work for Voss Industries. I overheard him discussing your case. Voss bribed Judge Hartley, paid him $5,000 to grant the injunction regardless of merit. The room went silent. You're certain? Rowan asked. I heard the conversation, and I know where the payment records are kept. She pulled an envelope from her bag. Copies. If you bring these to the territorial court, they'll have to overturn the injunction and investigate Hartley. Alara took the envelope, opened it. Inside were ledger pages and what looked like correspondence. Why are you doing this? She asked Catherine. Catherine looked at Rowan. Because I was wrong. A year ago when you were courting me, I chose security over everything else. I thought that was smart. But watching you two fight for what you've built, even knowing you'll probably lose, I realized I chose wrong. I married a man I don't love for money that doesn't make me happy, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were sad. I can't fix my mistake. But maybe I can keep you from paying the price for your father-in-law's cruelty. She looked at Alara. You're lucky, you know. He actually sees you. Alara's expression softened. Thank you. Catherine left as quietly as she'd arrived. Rowan and Alara stood in the hallway, holding evidence that could save them, both stunned into silence. We take this to the court, Alara said finally. Today, your father will know it came from Catherine's husband's files. He'll destroy them both. I know. She met his eyes. Should we protect her? She knew the risk. She chose to help anyway. They went to the territorial court that afternoon, filed formal complaints, submitted the evidence. The court clerk's face went pale, reading through the documents. This is serious, he stammered. We'll need to investigate immediately. How long? Rowan asked. Days, maybe a week. Judge Hartley will be suspended pending review. It wasn't immediate relief, but it was hope. They were walking back to their carriage when Marcus Voss appeared, flanked by two men Rowan didn't recognize, large men with hard faces. You made a mistake, Voss said quietly, bringing those documents forward. They're evidence of judicial corruption, Alara said. We had a legal obligation. You had an obligation to your family, to me. Voss's voice went cold. I gave you everything, paid for this farce of a marriage. And this is how you repay me? You tried to destroy us. I tried to teach you a lesson about respecting your betters. He stepped closer. But you're too stupid to learn, just like your mother. Alara's hand tightened on Rowan's arm. Stay away from us, Rowan said. Or what? You'll file more complaints? Take more of my private documents? Voss smiled without warmth. I could have those men break both your legs right now. Who would stop me? The law. The law is what I make it. When the investigation is over, when Hartley is replaced, the new judge will be someone I've already bought. Your injunction will stand. Your facility will never open, and you'll have nothing. Rowan felt rage building in his chest, felt his hands forming fists. Alara pulled him back. We're leaving. Don't give him an excuse. They got into the carriage. Voss watched them go with that same cold smile. He's going to come after us harder now, Alara said as they drove away. That wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Let him try. Rowan, he has resources we can't match, power we can't fight. If he decides to destroy us completely, then we'll burn together. He took her hand. I'm done being afraid of him, done letting him control our lives. That's not brave. That's suicidal. Maybe. But I'm doing it anyway. That night, someone set fire to their construction site. They woke to pounding on the door. Mrs. Reeves screaming about smoke. By the time they got there, half the facility was engulfed. The town's volunteer fire brigade managed to save the foundation and some of the equipment, but the timber frame was destroyed. The roof they'd just installed was gone. Months of work reduced to ash and charred wreckage. Rowan stood watching it burn, feeling something die inside him. Alara's face was illuminated by the flames. She looked like she was carved from stone. This was him, she said. My father did this. We don't know that. Yes, we do. Her voice was flat. He said he'd destroy us. He meant it. The fire chief approached, soot-stained and exhausted. I'm sorry, folks. We did what we could, but whoever started this used accelerant. It was meant to burn fast and complete. Can you prove arson? Rowan asked. Proving and prosecuting are different things. I'll file a report, but unless you have witnesses or evidence... He trailed off meaningfully. They had nothing, just ashes and rage, and the ruins of everything they'd tried to build. As dawn broke over the smoking wreckage, Alara finally moved, walked into what remained of the facility, picked up a piece of charred timber. "We rebuild," she said. "With what? We're broke. The insurance won't cover arson without proof. Every penny we had is literally up in smoke. Then we find more pennies." She turned to face him. "I'm not giving up. I won't give him that satisfaction." "Alara, this is over. We lost. We tried, and we lost." "No." Her eyes blazed. "This isn't over until I say it's over, until we both say it's over." Rowan looked at the destruction around them, at his wife standing in the ashes of their dream, still defiant, still fighting. And he realized something. He'd fallen in love with her completely, irrevocably. The kind of love that didn't care about logic or odds or practical outcomes. "Okay," he said, "we rebuild." "You mean it?" Every word. He moved to stand beside her. "But we do it smarter this time. We find allies, build support, make it impossible for your father to destroy us without destroying himself." "How?" "I don't know yet, but we figure it out." He took her hand. Together. She leaned against him, both of them staring at the smoking ruins. "I love you," she said quietly. "I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you. I love you too." They stood there as the sun rose, covered in soot, surrounded by destruction, holding each other like they were the only solid thing left in a crumbling world. And somewhere in Ashford, Marcus Voss was probably celebrating his victory. He didn't know yet that he hadn't won. He'd just made them dangerous. The morning after the fire, Rowan woke with Alara curled against him and ash still under his fingernails. He could smell the smoke in her hair, could see the gray light of dawn filtering through curtains they'd forgotten to close. For a moment, he let himself just feel the weight of her, the reality of her. Then the full scope of their situation crashed back and his chest tightened. They had nothing left. Alara stirred, opening her eyes. "We need to move fast." "Good morning to you too. I'm serious." She sat up, already pulling away from the brief softness. "My father will expect us to collapse now, to give up, or come begging. We have maybe 48 hours before he makes his next move." "What next move? He already burned down our facility." "Exactly. Which means he's committed now. He can't let us recover or it proves he failed." She climbed out of bed, started pacing. "He'll go after our remaining contracts, our reputation, probably try to seize the estate through some legal maneuver." Rowan watched her think, mind already racing ahead to the next battle. This was what made her different from everyone else he'd known. She didn't break. She bent, adapted, came back harder. "So what do we do?" he asked. "We stop playing his game, start playing ours." 2 hours later, they were in town. Not at a bank or lawyer's office. At the weekly market where farmers and tradespeople gathered to sell their goods. Rowan looked around, confused. "Why are we here?" "Because this is where real power lives," Alara gestured at the crowd. "Not in courtrooms or contracts, in people, in community." She walked up to the first stall, a woman selling vegetables. "Mrs. Chen, isn't it? We met at the Henderson party." The woman looked surprised. "Mrs. Vale?" "Yes, I'm sorry about your facility. Terrible thing." "It is, which is why I'm here." Alara leaned against the stall. "I need your help, and everyone else's in this market." Within 20 minutes, Alara had gathered a crowd. Farmers who'd been squeezed by Voss's price manipulations. Tradespeople who'd lost contracts when he consolidated his supply chains. Shop owners who'd been undercut by his operations. "He's been doing this for years," Alara told them. "Taking over, pushing out competition, controlling prices. My husband and I tried to build something independent. You saw what happened." "So what?" someone called out. "He's too powerful. Can't fight him." "Not alone. But together?" Alara's voice carried across the market. "He can't burn down everyone, can't sue everyone, can't intimidate an entire community." "What are you suggesting?" Mrs. Chen asked. "A cooperative. We pool resources, share equipment, buy in bulk, sell collectively, cut Voss out entirely." She pulled out a notebook. "I've been working on the numbers. If we combine purchasing power, we can negotiate better prices than any of us get individually. If we share processing facilities, we eliminate his monopoly." A murmur ran through the crowd. interest mixed with skepticism. "And who runs this cooperative?" a man in the back asked. "You and your husband?" "No. Everyone gets an equal vote, equal profit share based on contribution." Alara met his eyes. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust yourselves, to stop letting one man control your livelihoods." The crowd was silent. Rowan watched them process the idea, weighing risk against opportunity. Finally, Mrs. Chen spoke. "I'm in. If others join." "Me too," said a young farmer. "Voss cut my contracts last season. I barely survived winter." More voices joined. Not everyone. Some walked away shaking their heads. But enough. By the time the market closed, they had 27 commitments. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Walking back to the carriage, Rowan grabbed Alara's hand. "That was brilliant. That was desperate. There's a difference." "It was both. That's what makes it work." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Now comes the hard part. Actually delivering on the promises. The next week was brutal. They met with every person who'd signed on, working out details. Who would contribute what? How profits would be split? What equipment could be shared? Every conversation revealed new complications, new conflicts, new reasons it might fail. And through it all, Marcus Voss was hunting them. He sent lawyers to challenge the cooperative's business structure, filed complaints with the territory's trade commission, spread rumors that the whole thing was a fraud designed to steal people's money. "He's scared," Alara said, reading through the latest legal threat. "He wouldn't be fighting this hard if he wasn't. Or he's just cruel. Can't it be both?" Daniel Warren, their young lawyer, came through with a creative solution. He structured the cooperative as a workers' alliance rather than a traditional business, which put it under different regulations, ones Voss couldn't easily attack. "It's not perfect," Warren admitted, "but it'll hold up long enough to get you operational." "How much do we owe you?" Rowan asked. "Nothing. Yet." Warren smiled. "When the cooperative turns a profit, I get a percentage. Until then, I'm invested in making this work." It was the first time someone had bet on them instead of against them. Rowan felt something shift in his chest. The cooperative's first meeting was held in the burnt shell of their facility. Intentional symbolism, Alara's idea. "We're building from ashes," she told the assembled members. "Seems appropriate to start here." 27 people became 31. Word was spreading. The farmers compared notes on Voss's tactics, shared strategies for resisting his pressure. The tradespeople worked out sharing agreements for expensive equipment. "We need a name," someone said. "The Ashford Alliance," Mrs. Chen suggested. "Too formal," another voice countered. "What about the Common Ground?" They voted. The Common Ground won by 3 votes. Rowan watched Alara work the room, answering questions, mediating disputes, building consensus. She was in her element. This was what she'd been trained for, not by her father's business dealings, but by surviving them. She knew how people thought, how to find common cause among competing interests. "Your wife's something else," one of the older farmers said to Rowan. "Voss raised a hell of a daughter. Shame he can't see it." "He sees it. That's why he's trying to destroy her." After the meeting, Alara found Rowan sitting on the foundation stones of what should have been their facility. "We did it," she said, sitting beside him. "It's actually happening. Don't celebrate yet. We still need capital to rebuild. Equipment, materials." "I know." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "But for the first time since the fire, I feel like we might actually win." He kissed the top of her head. Didn't say what he was thinking, that Voss wouldn't let them win quietly, that the real fight was just beginning. The backlash came 3 days later. The bank called in their remaining line of credit. 2 of the cooperative members received threatening letters. Mrs. Chen's vegetable stall was vandalized overnight. "This is Voss," Alara said, pacing their bedroom. "He's escalating. We knew he would. Knowing and experiencing are different things." She stopped at the window, looking out at the estate grounds. "People are getting hurt now. Because of us. Because of him. Don't confuse the two. If we just accepted his terms, then he'd be crushing someone else. Someone without the resources to fight back." Rowan moved behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "We're not responsible for his cruelty. Aren't we? We provoked this. We existed. That was enough to provoke him." He turned her to face him. You said it yourself. He can't let anyone succeed outside his control. This was always coming. She pressed her face against his chest. I'm tired, Rowan. I'm so tired of fighting. I know, me too. They stood there, holding each other, both exhausted by the relentless pressure. Then Alara pulled back, wiping her eyes. Okay, moment of weakness over. What's our next move? That night, they called an emergency cooperative meeting. 28 people showed up. 3 had dropped out after the threats. I won't lie to you, Rowan told the assembled group. Voss is coming after all of us now. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Anyone who wants out, no judgment. This isn't your fight. No one moved. The hell it isn't, Mrs. Chen said. He's been pushing us around for years. I'm done being pushed. Others voiced agreement. The 3 who'd left were discussed briefly. Fear was understandable, they agreed, but the rest were committed. Then we need to go public, Alara said. Stop hiding what we're doing. Make it impossible for him to destroy us without everyone seeing. How? Someone asked. We throw a harvest festival. Invite the whole territory. Show what we've built. Make the common ground visible. It was risky. It would draw Voss's attention even more directly, but it would also make them legitimate in the eyes of the community. They voted. It passed. 2 weeks. That's how long they had to plan a festival that could make or break them. The work was exhausting. Members donated time, materials, labor. The burnt facility was cleared and converted into an open-air market space. Someone contributed a small stage. Another person arranged for musicians. Alara coordinated everything with the precision of a military campaign. Rowan watched her transform from defeated to determined, channeling all her fear and anger into action. You're terrifying when you're focused, he told her one evening. Good. I need to be. 3 days before the festival, Catherine Henderson appeared again. I heard about what you're doing, she said. I want to help. Your husband works for my father, Alara said carefully. Won't this cause problems? It already has. He found out about the documents I gave you. We've barely spoken since. Catherine's smile was sad. Turns out choosing right instead of safe has consequences. I'm sorry. Don't be. I made my choices. She pulled out a ledger. But I'm making different ones now. These are records of every contract Voss has manipulated in the last 5 years. Every bribe, every intimidation tactic. If you release them at the festival, he'll destroy you, Rowan interrupted. Probably, but he's going to do that anyway. At least this way it means something. She set the ledger down. Use it or don't, but you should know what you're really fighting. After she left, Rowan and Alara sat with the ledger between them. If we release this, there's no going back, Alara said. It'll be war. It's already war. We just haven't been fighting to win yet. She looked at him. You're sure? No, but I'm in anyway. They spent that night going through the ledger. The scope of Marcus Voss's corruption was staggering. Bribes to officials, threats to competitors, manipulated contracts that had ruined dozens of small businesses. My father built his empire on other people's misery, Alara said, her voice hollow. I knew he was ruthless. I didn't know he was this. None of this is your fault, isn't it? I benefited from it. Grew up in a house paid for by people he destroyed. You were a child. You didn't have a choice. I have one now. She closed the ledger. We release everything. All of it. The night before the festival, they couldn't sleep. They lay in bed together, both staring at the ceiling. Last chance to back out, Rowan said. Not a chance, you? Same. Alara rolled onto her side, propping herself up on one elbow. When this is over, when we've either won or lost, what do you want to do? What do you mean? If we win, we'll have the cooperative, a real business, a future. If we lose, we'll have nothing. Either way, life changes tomorrow. So what do you want from it? Rowan thought about that. What did he want? I want to wake up next to you without feeling like we're about to be crushed. I want to build something that lasts. Have children who don't inherit debt and shame. He stopped. I want to be happy. Actually, genuinely happy. Not just surviving. That's a good want. What about you? She was quiet for a moment. I want to make music again. Not hiding in empty rooms, but openly. I want people to hear what I create and know I made it. I want to be seen for what I am, not what my scar makes them assume. You're already all of that. Not to most people, but maybe after tomorrow, she trailed off. Or maybe we'll just be ruined and humiliated. Probably that one, she laughed. Actually laughed. You're terrible at reassurance. I'm better at honesty. Yes, you are. She kissed him. That's why I love you. They made love slowly, carefully, like they were memorizing each other in case everything fell apart tomorrow. After they lay tangled together, neither wanting to let go. Whatever happens, Alara whispered, we did this together. That matters. It matters most of all. Dawn came too quickly. The festival was scheduled for noon. By 10, people were already arriving. Farmers with their harvest displays. Craftspeople with goods to sell. Families looking for entertainment. The Common Ground members had transformed the space into something alive. Colorful banners hung between posts. Food stalls lined the perimeter. The small stage hosted a rotating schedule of local musicians. And in the center, displayed for everyone to see, was a detailed accounting of every business in the cooperative. What they produced, what they sold, how the profits were shared. Transparency as armor. Rowan stood at the edge of it all, watching Ashford's community gather. Some people he knew, others were strangers from neighboring towns. The crowd kept growing. More than I expected, Alara said, appearing beside him. Think Voss will show? Definitely. Question is what he'll do when he gets here. They didn't have to wait long. Marcus Voss arrived at 1 o'clock with 6 men Rowan didn't recognize. He walked through the festival like he owned it, examining everything with obvious disdain. Alara intercepted him near the stage. Father, glad you could make it. This is pathetic, Voss said. A handful of farmers playing at business. 28-member businesses, actually. Soon to be more. She gestured at the crowd. Turns out people like having options besides your monopoly. This won't last. You're underfunded and overextended. Half these people will quit before winter. Maybe. But we're trying anyway. Voss's expression darkened. You're embarrassing yourself. And me. No, I'm finally choosing myself. There's a difference. He leaned closer, voice dropping. I can still destroy this. One phone call to the right officials, this entire operation shut down by morning. You could try, but then I'd release these. Alara handed him a folder. Voss opened it. His face went white, then red. Where did you get these? Someone with a conscience. They're copies. The originals are with the Territorial Oversight Board. If anything happens to me, to Rowan, to anyone in this cooperative, they get released publicly. You're bluffing. Am I? She smiled without warmth. You taught me to be ruthless, Father. Congratulations. I learned. Voss looked at the documents, at the festival around him, at his daughter who'd finally stopped being afraid. You've made a powerful enemy. I already had one. Now I'm fighting back. He walked away without another word, his men following. Rowan watched them disappear into the crowd. That was either brilliant or suicidal, he said. Probably both. Alara was shaking slightly. But he won't move against us now, not immediately. He needs time to assess the damage. And we need to make this cooperative work before he figures out a countermove. The festival continued around them. At 3 o'clock, Alara took the stage. Rowan hadn't known she planned to speak, hadn't known about the violin case she carried. Thank you all for coming, she said into the borrowed microphone. I'm Alara Vale. Some of you know me. Most of you know my father. And you probably know he's not happy about what we're building here. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. I grew up watching him consolidate power, eliminate competition, control markets. I thought that was just business, just how things worked. She paused. But it's not. It's corruption. It's cruelty dressed up as capitalism, and I'm done pretending it's acceptable. She opened the violin case. My mother was a musician. She gave up her art to marry my father, gave up her voice to be respectable. And it killed her, slowly, quietly. But it killed her. Alara lifted the violin. I won't make the same choice. I won't be silent. I won't be invisible. I won't let fear decide my life. She started playing. The piece was the same one Rowan had heard that night months ago. Raw and urgent and full of everything she'd been holding back. But this time she played it for everyone. Let them see her scars, her strength, her refusal to be diminished. The crowd was silent. Even the children stopped moving. When the music ended, the applause was deafening. Alara stepped down from the stage and walked straight to Rowan. He caught her, held her while she shook with adrenaline and relief. That was terrifying, I know. She pulled back, but necessary. People started approaching, thanking her, sharing their own stories of standing up to Voss or others like him. The festival transformed from a simple market into something else, a gathering of resistance, of community choosing itself over convenient submission. By the time the sun set, they had 17 new member commitments for the cooperative. Local press had covered the event. Someone had recorded Alara's speech and performance. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was momentum. Walking home that night, exhausted and exhilarated, Alara leaned against Rowan. We actually did something today. We did everything. Not everything. Voss is still out there, still dangerous. But he's on defense now. We changed the terms. She stopped walking, turned to face him in the moonlight. I need to tell you something. His heart jumped. What? I'm pregnant. The world tilted. How long have you known? A week, maybe more. I wasn't sure until I saw the doctor yesterday. She searched his face. I didn't say anything because of everything happening. But after today, after choosing to fight, you needed to know. Rowan couldn't speak, couldn't process. They were broke, embattled, facing down a powerful enemy. This was the worst possible time. And yet, he pulled her close, kissed her hard, then gentle, then desperate. We're going to be parents, he said against her mouth. Are you happy? Scared? Both? Everything, all of it. He rested his forehead against hers. How are you? Terrified, excited, determined to make this world safe enough for them. Them? Our child, our family. Everyone in that cooperative who's counting on us. She pulled back. This changes everything, Rowan. We can't afford to lose now. Then we won't. They walked the rest of the way home in silence, both thinking about the impossible future they were trying to build. The life growing between them made it real in a way nothing else had. That night, lying in bed, Rowan put his hand on Alara's still flat stomach. Hello in there, he whispered. Your mother and I are in the middle of fighting your grandfather. It's complicated, but we're winning, slowly. And by the time you get here, we'll have built something worth inheriting. Alara's hand covered his. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not. I'm making ones I refuse to break. She turned in his arms, kissed him slowly. I love you, even when you're impossibly stubborn. Especially then. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Judge Hartley had been arrested. The investigation into Voss's bribery had expanded. 3 other officials were under scrutiny. The Territorial Oversight Board was launching a full audit of Voss Industries. It wasn't over, but the pieces were moving. Catherine's documents did this, Alara said, reading through the news reports. She destroyed him. She destroyed her marriage too, and probably her reputation. Some things are worth destroying for. Alara looked up at him. Should we call her? Thank her? I think she knows. That afternoon, Daniel Warren brought contracts from 2 manufacturers in the capital. They wanted to work with the Common Ground directly, cutting Voss out entirely. Word spread fast about the festival, Warren said. About what you're building. People want in. People want to hurt Voss, Rowan corrected. Can it be both? The cooperative held an emergency meeting, voted to accept the contracts, began planning the actual rebuild of the processing facility, this time with shared ownership, shared risk, shared reward. It wasn't the future Rowan had imagined standing at the altar months ago. It was better, messier, more complicated, infinitely more uncertain, but it was theirs. A week later, Marcus Voss was forced to testify before the Territorial Oversight Board. The proceedings were public. Alara refused to attend. I don't need to watch him fall, she said. I just need to know we're standing. They were in the garden she'd restored, sitting among flowers that had survived winter. Her hand rested on her stomach, though there was nothing to feel yet. What do you think she'll be like? Rowan asked. What makes you think it's a she? Intuition, or hope. A daughter who grows up watching her mother refuse to be silenced. Alara smiled. That's a nice dream. So was this. He gestured at the estate, the gardens, the life they were building. And we made it real. We're still making it real. Present tense. Ongoing. Yes, he agreed. We are. In town, Marcus Voss was being dismantled question by question, document by document. His empire was cracking. His influence was crumbling. But in the garden, Rowan and Alara sat in the sun, planning a future that belonged to them. Not perfect, not guaranteed, but possible. And possibility, they'd learned, was everything. 6 months passed before Marcus Voss's trial concluded. 6 months of testimony, evidence, and the slow dismantling of an empire built on intimidation. Rowan and Alara followed the proceedings through newspapers, but kept their distance. They had their own empire to build. Alara was showing now. 4 months along, her pregnancy visible beneath the practical dresses she favored for working at the cooperative. She moved differently, more carefully, one hand often resting on the growing curve of her belly. "You need to slow down," Mrs. Reeves insisted, watching Alara haul a crate of paperwork across the newly rebuilt facility floor. "I'm pregnant, not fragile." But Alara set the crate down with a wince, though maybe a little fragile. The Common Grounds processing facility had risen from the ashes larger than before. 43-member businesses now, stretching across 3 counties. The shared equipment hummed day and night. The cooperative had contracts with manufacturers as far as the capital. It wasn't smooth. There were disputes about profit distribution, arguments over expansion priorities, members who wanted to sell out to larger operations. Democracy was messy and exhausting, but it worked. Rowan spent his days managing the agricultural side, while Alara handled logistics and member relations. They'd hired staff, young people from Ashford who needed work and believed in what they were building. Daniel Warren had become their legal counsel full-time, taking equity in the cooperative instead of fees he knew they couldn't afford yet. "We're profitable," Alara announced one evening, showing Rowan the quarterly statements. "Actually, genuinely profitable. We can pay everyone back, reinvest, expand." Rowan looked at the numbers. They weren't wealthy, but they were solvent, stable, growing. "We did it," he said, still not quite believing. "We're doing it. Present tense." She rubbed her back. "This child is going to be born into a functioning business. That's more than either of us had." He pulled her onto his lap carefully, mindful of her belly. "You're incredible. You know that?" "I'm practical. There's a difference." "No, you're both." He kissed her neck. "And I'm lucky you didn't listen when I told you this was impossible." "You never said it was impossible. You said it was improbable. I'm good with improbable." The trial verdict came down on a Tuesday morning. Guilty on 14 counts of bribery, fraud, and racketeering. Marcus Voss was sentenced to 8 years in territorial prison and ordered to pay restitution to every business he'd damaged. The list was long. The Common Ground was on it. "He'll appeal," Daniel Warren said, reviewing the judgment. But the evidence was overwhelming. Catherine's documents sealed it. "How is she?" Alara asked. "Divorced. Living with her sister in the capital. Starting over." Warren hesitated. "She asked about you. Wanted to know if you were well." "Tell her yes. Tell her thank you." That night, Rowan expected Alara to celebrate. Instead, she was quiet, distant. She stood at their bedroom window, looking out at nothing. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. We won." Her voice was flat. "So why do I feel empty?" He moved behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his hands on her belly. "Because you're grieving." "For what?" "He tried to destroy us. For the father you wish you'd had. For the relationship that was never possible." He felt her tense. "Winning doesn't erase that loss." She turned in his arms, tears finally spilling over. "I wanted him to see me, just once, to see what I built and be proud instead of threatened. And now he's in prison, and it's too late, and I'm—" Her voice broke. "I'm going to be a mother, and I have no idea how to do that without becoming him." "You won't." "How do you know?" "Because you already made different choices. You chose partnership over control, community over domination, love over fear." He wiped her tears with his thumbs. "You're already the opposite of him." She pressed her face against his chest and cried. Not delicate tears, but gut-wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Rowan held her through it, saying nothing, just being there. When she finally quieted, she pulled back. "I need to see him." "Voss?" "Yes. Before the baby comes, I need to—" She struggled for words. I need to say goodbye to hoping he'll change. The territorial prison was 3 hours by train. Rowan offered to come, but Alara insisted on going alone. This was something she needed to do herself. She returned that evening, exhausted and pale. Rowan met her at the door. How was it? Short. He wouldn't look at me, just kept saying I'd betrayed him, that I chose wrong. She moved past him toward the stairs. He's never going to see it differently. I'm sorry. Don't be. I needed to know for certain. She paused halfway up. He asked if the baby was a boy, said a grandson might be worth something. When I told him we didn't know yet, he said daughters were disappointing investments. Rowan felt rage spike through him. Alara! I told him I pitied him, that he'd built an empire and had nothing real. No love, no loyalty. No one who'd mourn him when he died. She smiled without humor. Then I left, and I'm never going back. She went upstairs. Rowan heard the bedroom door close. He gave her an hour alone, then went up with tea and found her sitting on the floor of what would become the nursery, surrounded by paint samples. I'm thinking green, she said, something soft but not pastel, gender neutral. He sat beside her. You okay? No, but I will be. She leaned against him. Tell me about your father. The question surprised him. Why? Because you've forgiven him, or made peace with him. I don't know how you did that, and I need to learn. Rowan thought about Theodore Vale, the drunk, the gambler, the man who'd ruined everything. I haven't forgiven him exactly. I've just stopped letting him define me. He picked up a paint sample. He made terrible choices. Hurt people. Hurt me. But he also taught me what not to be. That's worth something. Is it enough? It has to be. Because he's dead and I'm alive and I get to choose what comes next. He looked at her. Same as you. She nodded slowly. Green, then. Soft green for new beginnings. The months that followed were a strange combination of peace and chaos. The cooperative continued growing. New members joined weekly. They opened a second processing facility in a neighboring county, started training programs for young farmers. Alara worked until her doctor ordered bed rest at 8 months. She hated it, hated being still, hated not being at the center of things. But she used the time to write policy manuals, organizational structures, succession plans. You're building something that'll outlast us, Rowan said, reading through her work. That's the point. We don't own this. We're just stewards for the next generation. Very philosophical for someone who can't see her own feet. She threw a pillow at him, missed, laughed at herself. Those last weeks were simultaneously the longest and shortest of Rowan's life. Every day felt like waiting. Every night brought false alarms. Alara was miserable and radiant and terrified and determined. What if I'm terrible at this? She asked one night, unable to sleep. At what? Being a mother. What if I'm cold like my father? What if I can't love them enough? Then you'll learn, same as everything else we've done. He rubbed her swollen feet. You're already worrying about being good enough. That's a pretty good sign you will be. She smiled tiredly. You're annoyingly optimistic lately. I'm happy. It's confusing. The baby came 3 weeks later. Fast labor that caught them unprepared. They barely made it to the doctor's clinic in town. 8 hours. That's how long it took for their world to completely change. The baby was a girl, small and furious and absolutely perfect. They named her Clara, after no one. A new name for a new beginning. Rowan held his daughter for the first time and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. This tiny person who looked like an angry old man wrapped in blankets was his responsibility, his to protect and raise and hopefully not destroy. She's going to be trouble, Alara said from the bed, exhausted but smiling. She's your daughter. Of course she is. Our daughter. Right, our daughter. He sat carefully beside Alara, Clara still cradled against his chest. We made a person. We did several improbable things. That was just the latest. Clara made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a complaint about the general state of existence. Her tiny fist waved in the air like she was already arguing with the world. She's definitely yours, Rowan said. Alara laughed, then cried, then both at once. They brought Clara home to an estate that was finally actually theirs. The debts were settled, the repairs were complete. The gardens bloomed with flowers Alara had planted and Rowan had learned to maintain. Mrs. Reeves cried when she saw the baby. "She looks like your mother," she told Rowan, around the eyes. The cooperative members threw them a celebration, filled the facility with gifts, handmade blankets, carved toys, offers of childcare from experienced parents. Mrs. Chen brought vegetables from her garden and advice neither of them asked for but both appreciated. "It takes a community," she said, holding Clara with practiced ease. "You two built one. Now let it support you back." They did. It was hard. Accepting help felt like admitting weakness at first. But they learned. Let people bring meals when they were too exhausted to cook. Accepted offers to watch Clara so they could sleep. Built networks of care that extended far beyond their small family. The first year was brutal, beautiful and brutal. Clara didn't sleep, didn't eat easily, screamed like she was being murdered every night from 6 to 8 without fail. "This is punishment," Alara said at 3 in the morning, walking circles with their shrieking daughter, "for every bad thing we've ever done." "Pretty sure babies don't work that way." "Then why is she like this?" "Because she's ours. We're both stubborn. She got a double dose." Clara eventually calmed, eventually slept, eventually became a small human with opinions and preferences and an alarming intelligence. She was walking at 10 months, talking at 14. By 2, she was already questioning everything. "Why do the workers share equipment?" she asked, watching through the facility windows. "Because sharing means everyone can access things they couldn't afford alone," Alara explained. "Why can't they afford it?" "Because resources are limited and—" She stopped. "You're 2. How are we having this conversation?" "She's your daughter," Rowan said. "You were probably interrogating people at 2 as well." The common ground thrived. 5 years after the fire, they had 70 member businesses, processing facilities in 4 counties, education programs, youth apprenticeships. They'd become a model that other communities studied and replicated. Rowan and Alara stepped back from daily management, transitioning to advisory roles. They'd built something bigger than themselves, something that didn't need them to survive. "Strange, isn't it?" Alara said one evening, watching a new member present her business plan to the cooperative board. "We fought so hard to create this. Now it's growing without us." "That was always the goal." "I know, it's just bittersweet." "Everything good is." They'd bought the adjacent property, the land Marcus Voss had used to attack them, converted it into affordable housing for cooperative members. Small homes that people could actually own instead of rent. It felt like justice. Quiet justice, but justice nonetheless. Marcus Voss died in prison 4 years into his sentence. Heart attack, quick and undramatic. The news came via a brief telegram. Alara read it twice, then filed it away without comment. "You don't have to pretend you don't feel anything," Rowan said. "I don't know what I feel." She looked out the window at Clara playing in the garden. Relief, maybe? That she'll never know him, never have to defend herself against his judgment. Is that all? And grief, for the father I invented in my head, the one who never existed. She turned back to him. "Is that wrong?" "Nothing you feel is wrong." They held a small memorial, not for Marcus Voss, he'd burned those bridges himself, but for the idea of family that could have been, for the forgiveness that was never possible, for the closure that came too late. Catherine came to visit. She'd remarried, a quiet man who worked in education. They seemed happy in an understated way. "I heard about your father," she said to Alara. "Thank you." "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." Alara gestured at the cooperative facility visible through the window. "We built something he couldn't destroy. That's enough." Catherine smiled. "You two terrified me, you know, at the beginning, the way you fought for each other when any sensible person would have quit." "We weren't sensible," Rowan said. "No, you were brave. There's a difference." She looked at Alara. "I made the safe choice. Married for security. And it made me miserable. You made the hard choice, and it made you free." After she left, Alara was quiet for a long time. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Rowan. "Everything we went through?" "Which part?" "All of it. The forced marriage, the debts, the fighting, the risk. He thought about the young man who'd stood at an altar refusing to look at his bride, the one who'd been drowning in his father's failures and his own bitterness. No, because that path led here, to you, to Clara, to something worth having. Even the hard parts? Especially the hard parts. They made us into people who could build this. He pulled her close. I was surviving before. Now I'm living. That's not a small difference. She kissed him. I love you. Even when I'm annoyingly optimistic? Especially then. Clara turned 7, started asking questions about her grandfather she'd never met. Was he mean? She asked one evening at dinner. Alara set down her fork. He was complicated. He made choices that hurt people, including me. Why? Because he thought power was more important than people, and he was wrong. Clara considered this. Did you forgive him? No. But I let go of needing him to be different than he was. Alara reached across the table, took her daughter's small hand. You don't have to forgive people who hurt you, but you can choose not to let that hurt define your life. Is that what you did? That's what we did. Your father and I, together. Clara looked at Rowan. You were sad too? Very sad. For a long time. But you're not sad now? No. Now I'm happy. Good. Clara returned to her dinner like the conversation was settled. Later, after she was in bed, Alara found Rowan on the porch. He was sitting in the chair he'd built from salvaged wood, looking out at property that was finally, completely theirs. What are you thinking about? She asked, settling beside him. How much has changed? We're the same people who stood in that courtroom 8 years ago, but also completely different. Better, different? Infinitely. He took her hand. Do you remember what you said at the beginning, that you didn't want to be trapped like your mother? Yes. You're not. Neither of us are. We built something real, something that matters. We did. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I wish she could have seen it, my mother, could have known it was possible to choose differently. Maybe she did, through you. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the estate. In the distance, the cooperative facility lights glowed against the night sky. Somewhere in town, 70 businesses were closing for the day, their owners going home to families they could support because of a community they'd built together. It wasn't perfect. There were still disputes, still challenges, still days when everything felt impossible. But it was theirs. Years passed. Clara grew into a fierce, intelligent girl who wanted to be a composer like her grandmother and an engineer like the women she saw at the cooperative. She questioned everything, trusted nothing at face value, and loved with the same fierce intensity her mother had. She's going to change the world, Mrs. Reeves said, watching 8-year-old Clara reorganize the facility's filing system because the existing method was inefficient. Or burn it down trying, Rowan said. Both, Alara corrected. She'll do both. On their 10th anniversary, Rowan took Alara back to the courthouse where they'd married. Not inside. Neither of them wanted to relive that particular memory, but outside, where they'd first chosen to fight together. Do you remember what you said? He asked, when your father offered to take you back. I said I was already home. Did you mean it? Not entirely. I was terrified, but I wanted it to be true. She looked up at him. Now it is. Good. Because I need to ask you something. He pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring. Nothing elaborate, just a simple band engraved with coordinates. The exact location where their facility had burned down and they decided to rebuild. We never did this properly, Rowan said. The first time was a transaction, but I'm asking now, really asking. Will you marry me again? For the right reasons this time. Alara started crying. We're already married, you idiot. I know, but I want to choose it. Choose you. Not because of debts or obligations, because I love you and can't imagine life without you. Then yes, obviously yes. They had a second wedding, small and private with just the people who mattered. Clara was flower girl. Mrs. Reeves cried through the entire ceremony. The cooperative members filled the renovated estate with flowers and food and joy. This time, when Rowan looked at his bride, he saw everything. The scar that no longer seemed like a flaw. The strength that had saved them both. the love that had transformed a forced arrangement into the foundation of his life. "I see you," he said when it was his turn to speak. "All of you. And I choose this, choose us, every day." Alara's vows were simpler. "You made me brave. Thank you." They kissed to applause and laughter and the sound of their daughter cheering. The celebration lasted until late. People shared stories about the early days, the impossible odds, the stupid risks, the moments when failure seemed certain. "I thought they were crazy," Mrs. Chen admitted. "Young people playing at business while going broke. We were crazy," Alara said. "But it worked anyway. Because you fought for it, both of you, together." Daniel Warren raised his glass. "To improbable victories and the stubborn people who make them possible." Everyone drank to that. Later, alone in their bedroom, Rowan and Alara stood at the window. The estate stretched out before them, gardens in bloom, buildings repaired, life everywhere they looked. "Do you think we've done enough?" Alara asked. "Built enough? Changed enough?" "There's no enough. We just keep going." "That's exhausting." "Yes, but worth it." Clara called from her room, a nightmare about machines that wouldn't work. Rowan went to comfort her while Alara stayed at the window. She thought about the girl she'd been, marked by fire, sold into marriage, certain she'd repeat her mother's fate. That girl would never have believed this was possible, would never have imagined standing here, free and loved and powerful in ways that had nothing to do with money or status. But here she was. Rowan returned, Clara settled. He wrapped his arms around Alara from behind, both of them looking out at everything they'd built. "I love you," he said. "I know. I love you too. What are you thinking about?" "Beginnings. How we started as strangers bound by contract and became this." "This?" "Partners, parents, people who chose each other every day even when it was hard, especially when it was hard." He turned her to face him. "Was it worth it? All of it?" She looked at his face, older now, marked by years of work and worry, but also joy. Looked past him at the room where their daughter slept safely. Looked beyond that at the community they'd built from ashes and determination. "Every minute," she said, "every impossible, improbable, ridiculous minute." He kissed her. She kissed him back. And somewhere in the house, their daughter dreamed of machines and music and a future they'd made possible. Outside, Ashford slept. The Common Grounds facilities stood quiet until morning. The estate breathed with life and purpose, and the weight of choices that had transformed everything. It wasn't the ending Rowan had imagined standing at that altar 10 years ago. It was infinitely better. They'd started with nothing but debts and distance, built something from desperation and defiance, turned a forced arrangement into a love that reshaped not just their lives, but an entire community. And in the end, they weren't remembered for the contract that bound them. They were remembered for the courage that made them choose each other. Every single day, through fire and failure and impossible odds. They were remembered for refusing to give up, for building something that lasted, for proving that love, real love, chosen love, fought for love, could transform everything. Years later, when Clara was grown and running the cooperative herself, she'd ask her parents to tell the story. How they met, how they fell in love, how they survived. And Rowan and Alara would sit together, hands still intertwined after decades, and tell her the truth, that it wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. And real was what they'd chosen, what they'd built, what they'd become together.